Thank you for joining us today. We are in the process of now. This is our second webinar about anti-sex trafficking for parents and guardians, and we have our wonderful guests here tonight who are going to be co-facilitating the discussion about human trafficking and what you need to know. I am Shameen Sandhu. I'm the system leader for mental health and professional support services here at the Toronto District School Board. And we have our guests, Jasminder Sakhan, who's if you can wave, Jasminder, I don't know if you did, sorry, who's a gender justice advocate through the intersectional feminist and trauma-informed lenses. She's a graduate of the University of Oxford's Master's in Criminology and Criminal Justice and has a double degree in political science and criminology from the University of Toronto. Jasminder has extensive experience working in the field of gendered violence prevention, particularly human trafficking prevention. Jasminder is a community development coordinator at the Victim Services of Toronto and has worked on human trafficking prevention strategies for Toronto, Peel, Durham, and Halton regions. She has extensive experience leading and assisting research and policy analysis through work experience at the Ministry of the Attorney General, Blue Jay Legal and Community Legal Education Ontario, to just name a few. As a South Asian woman, she's passionate about social justice and anti-oppressive practices. And we're so very grateful to have you and your expertise here with us tonight, Jasminder. We also have Linda with us, Harlows, who is a human trafficking prevention educator, speaker, and certified family coach, vlogger, and author. Wow, Linda. A mother of human trafficking survivor. And again, we thank you for being here, Linda. We know those stories are not always easy to articulate again and again, and we're so grateful for your time today. Linda has endeavors to help families educate themselves in the hopes to prevent victimization, volunteering with many organizations, including Victim Services, Covenant House, and more. Linda understands and tries to help both the survivors and those in the families of the survivor to learn coping skills and alleviate the guilt that comes from being victims. Linda has done many interviews to spread awareness with CBC, the Toronto Star, and many more. You can also check out the work Linda has done and is doing, as well as watch her training videos on her website or YouTube channel, both called parentwithpurpose.ca. Linda, we can put that in the chat. Just for everybody to have. Plus, we'll make sure that when we have our website up at the Toronto District School Board, we'll have that there. I want to start off grounding today's presentation with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Thank you for doing that, Linda. Thank you for everybody for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to Jasminder to start the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that very warm introduction, Shameen. I'm so excited to be joining you all this evening along with Linda to talk about human trafficking and what exactly it looks like here in Toronto and how we can actually support young people that are experiencing trafficking to ensure that we help keep young people safe. So before we get started, I do want to mention that this is a heavy presentation. We're going to be talking about human trafficking. We're going to be talking about a lack of consent. We're going to be talking about parenting strategies to support young people. And so I know that this is not an easy topic. I know that these are not easy conversations. So if at any point you need to just take a moment, step away, grab a coffee, snuggle up while we're presenting, and just get really comfortable, because I do recognize that it can be difficult and challenging to hear about these things. So of course, if you just need a moment to yourself, if you just need to make sure that, you're taking a moment right now to get comfortable within your own space, just to make it a little bit more comfortable while you're hearing this information, I definitely welcome you to do so. And I welcome you to do that throughout the presentation if you need to as well. I am here on behalf of Victim Services Toronto. Victim Services Toronto provides immediate crisis response, intervention, and prevention services that are responsive to the needs of individuals, families, and communities. So anytime there is a crime or a sudden tragedy that is taking place within Toronto, whether that is Central Toronto, North York, Etobicoke or Scarborough, we are here to help. We are here to support. We are able to, get support for people in terms of helping them navigate through really challenging systems. It can be hard, actually, to, it can be really challenging when something like this, like human trafficking or any type of crime takes place, and really trying to figure out, where do I go for help? What are all the resources that are available to me in my community? So we actually help community members go through the process. We can connect them with longer term resources, supports, a housing worker, a therapist, anything like that. And so that's really our victim crisis response program. And we also have high risk support services and case management services for any people that have experienced trauma and just need support rebuilding their lives. We also have a trauma dog program. And so we actually have a dog that, she's so lovely. Her name is Dandy, and she supports victims and survivors who have been victimized and just need some emotional support, whether that's in court or anything else. We also have student programming. So we actually have quite a few young people. If you're a parent of a young person who is in high school, they can actually volunteer with our TEAR program, which is Teens Ending Abusive Relationships. It's a really powerful program in which they can volunteer with us and really, gain a better understanding of what can we do within the community in order to end gender-based violence and gender inequity. And so that's a really powerful program. As adults, you can volunteer your time. As well as encouraging young people to volunteer their time. And of course, we also have programs for students that are in university as well. And so in order to really understand and kind of begin our conversation today, if you've been at one of our previous human trafficking specific presentations, I welcome you back. If this is your first time, listening to a presentation like this, really want to set a common foundation for all of our understanding on what exactly is human trafficking? How do we define it? What does it look like? And, therefore, how can we support people that are experiencing it? And so first and foremost, let's start off by defining it. There's long wordy definitions like the one here: human trafficking being the recruitment, transportation, harboring, or controlling of persons, primarily for the purpose of exploiting that person through forced labor or the sex industry. And, when we say forced labor, that can take place within agriculture, within, factories, within any type of manufacturing. And then there's the sex industry. So that could be that someone is being forced to do some form of sexual acts, whether that is work at a massage parlor or, work as a sex worker out of an escort agency or work within a strip club, any of these spaces. Anytime somebody is being forced, so there's force involved, there's fraud involved, somebody's being tricked, and there's coercion, undue pressure involved, and someone else is doing all of these things to you, and then they're controlling the money from that thing taking place. It is considered human trafficking. And so when we talk about the sex industry and sex trafficking, that's kind of what we're really going to be focusing our attention on. And the reason behind that is primarily what we see here within the Toronto context and also within a Canadian context. What we tend to see is domestic sex trafficking. What I mean by that is that it is people that live or they could be born here, they could have immigrated here, so they live in Toronto, or they were born and raised in Toronto, here within the GTA, in Ontario, within Canada. They're trafficked right here within those spaces. Zero movement needs to take place in order for a person to be trafficked. When we talk about force could be physical force. It could be the threat of the use of force. There's also fraud. Fraud is tricking somebody into thinking that something is one thing and it's really not. And then there's coercion. Coercion is pressuring someone into doing something that they would not otherwise do unless a whole lot of pressure was put on them. And when all three of these things are facilitated by a third party, so basically there's someone else, they're, recruiting that person, transporting that person, harboring that person, or controlling their actions. And then that person is making money from that individual, and that person's the one that, really is in control of the money. They could be providing an allowance maybe to the person that they're trafficking as well. But as long as it's the trafficker that's in control of the money, that is considered human trafficking. And so, as I mentioned, domestic sex trafficking is what we primarily tend to see. And when it's what we primarily tend to see, it doesn't look like what we tend to see in mainstream movies and media. It actually tends to look quite different than that. It looks a lot like someone, creating a trusting relationship with someone, whether it's by pretending to be an intimate partner, so a boyfriend or girlfriend or, something like that. Or it could be someone that is pretending to be a friend, or it could be a family member, or it could be a friend of a friend or a cousin's friend or something like that. There tends to be some kind of trusting relationship involved. And then what that person does is they build that trust, and then they later on exploit that trust and traffic that person. And we're going to talk about the process and how that happens. So, as I mentioned, things tend to start off with some kind of trusting relationship. The person who is the trafficker really, they tend to know the person from before. We talk a lot about stranger danger, but it's really important to recognize that a lot of the times when people, in particular young people, are being victimized, they are being victimized by people that they know, oftentimes people that are quite similar in age to them. And so there tends to be some kind of trusting relationship involved. And I know we teach our kids stranger danger, all that type of stuff. I'm not saying that we should tell our kids to talk to strangers, but actually majority of gender-based violence tends to take place um, within relationships, and within abuse tends to take place when there's some kind of trusting relationship involved, and human trafficking is included within that as well. And so I think it's very important to recognize this, and therefore it's very important to teach young people, what does a healthy relationship look like? Not just what is a relationship, but what is a healthy relationship? What are markers of an unhealthy relationship? What are markers of an abusive relationship? And if somebody makes you uncomfortable, speak out, say something, right? Because traffickers are building that really trusting, loving relationship, and then they later on exploit that. Oftentimes people think that there's physical violence involved. That is why somebody is being trafficked. That is why they are staying. And oftentimes this is actually not the case. There tends to be physical violence involved to some degree in almost every single human trafficking situation, but oftentimes not to the degree that we see in mainstream movies and media. Oftentimes it's not taking place exactly within that way. So what we see is the fear of physical violence for many people oftentimes is more than enough to keep them there. And when I say it's more than enough to keep them there, traffickers on average from trafficking just one person are making about $280,000 cash per year from trafficking just that one individual. Traffickers are savvy business people. They don't want to damage the product that they're selling. So if they can find an alternative way to keep that person there, they will. And usually that is through psychological manipulation. And oftentimes, people, there's this assumption that traffickers are this old man that's trafficking this young girl. And that is, so far from the truth, because oftentimes, there's this assumption that, when we're talking about young, we think about someone in their early 20s. The average age of someone being recruited into human trafficking is just 13 years old. And the average age of someone being fully entrenched within a human trafficking situation is just 17. And so there are some spaces or schools or individuals that might think, what, this is way too young to be teaching people about trafficking. And this is why I'm so grateful to the Toronto District School Board for being so proactive and involving parents and involving the community and having a real strategy around, young people getting the supports that they need when it comes to human trafficking. And so, if a person's young enough to be trafficked, they are young enough to, or if a person is old enough to be trafficked, they're old enough to learn about human trafficking and what it is. And so we really want to make sure that we keep young people informed, we educate them, because one of our best tools for prevention, well, the two best tools for prevention are education and empowerment. Unless we are willing and open to educate young people on what is human trafficking, what does that look like, and unless we're willing to empower them and make sure that they feel supported in every which way humanly possible, those young people are vulnerable. And so we really need to keep that at the front of our mind as well. So along with that, oftentimes people think that traffickers are a significantly older man. Traffickers oftentimes actually tend to be quite similar in age to their victim. Remember how we mentioned that trusting relationship? When we're talking about that trusting relationship, it's kind of hard to build a trusting relationship when there's, a 20-year age gap, right? We might be finding that between ourselves and our own kids and trying to relate and building those relationships and keeping those relationships over time. And so oftentimes, traffickers are quite similar in age to the person that they're trafficking. And then also alarm bells don't go off in the same way. If your kid came home with, they're 16 years old, they come home with a 17, 18-year-old, your alarm bells in your mind are not going to go off the same way as they would if the person was 35 or 40 or something along those lines. And so it's very important to remember that this is happening to people that are quite young, but traffickers themselves are also quite young. It's also important to remember that, there's this stereotype that it's just girls that are being trafficked. And we know that because of stereotypes around what it means to be a man, um, a lot of young people are being trafficked or experiencing some form of sexual violence. A lot of young boys and men, they don't feel comfortable coming forward. They don't feel comfortable coming forward and reporting because they've been told their entire lives that, they need to find sex and be a man and do this and do that. And that really does shut down a lot of space for young people to really come forward, especially young men to come forward and say, you know what, I've experienced something that's really horrible and extremely traumatizing, and I need help. I need support. And every single child, regardless of gender, deserves that support. I also want to mention that LGBTQ plus youth are also at higher risk of being trafficked. And that's not because of anything inherent within their identity, but rather the lack of supports and resources that they're getting from their communities, that they're getting from their families, that makes them more likely to be trafficked because they're more vulnerable. And we're going to talk about vulnerability, and we're going to talk about how traffickers exploit a young person's vulnerability as well. So, we really do end up seeing, people of any gender being trafficked. And so what I really want to emphasize is that anybody of any gender can be trafficked. And we've also seen people of all genders being traffickers as well. And so, just because somebody's not necessarily dating, dating the person that they're with, or maybe they're dating someone of the same gender, that doesn't mean that they won't be trafficked. And so I just want to, mention that as well. Anybody can be a trafficker, anybody can be trafficked as well. Another really common misconception is that people oftentimes think that young people are being kidnapped, that they're being thrown into the back of a white van and, they go missing when they're being trafficked. And the reality is that oftentimes young people are not going missing. Victim Services of Durham Region, when they analyzed their statistics, they found that 50%, half of all children that they were supporting who were under the age of 18 years old were living at home with their parents while they were being trafficked. They go to school Monday to Friday, pimp picks them up Friday, traffics them out Friday, Saturday, has them home for curfew by Sunday. That is the type of stuff that we are seeing. You do not have to be missing. You do not have to be kidnapped in order to be trafficked. And like I mentioned before, those bars, those ties are very psychological in nature. So oftentimes people are not physically being locked up or tied up. They're going with this person because they feel loved. They go with this person because they feel cared for. They go with this person because this person fills a gap. That person fills a need within this person's life. Another really common misconception is that people think, okay, well, there has to be substance use if somebody is being trafficked. Oftentimes we don't see substances being used at all. Sometimes we see, if somebody already has, a substance use disorder, they may be more likely, or they may be more vulnerable to potentially being trafficked because they don't have access to other supports and resources. And traffickers oftentimes present themselves to be that support and resource to anybody with any type of vulnerability. And so it's really important to remember that, when it comes to substance use, it doesn't necessarily have to be present in every single human trafficking situation. Like I mentioned before, there's a really common misconception around domestic versus international human trafficking. People just assume that all human trafficking is international. Somebody is being put on a plane, taken to another country, trafficked within that country. And oftentimes that is just not the reality. That's not an accurate depiction of what's going on here. In particular in Canada, the majority of human trafficking is domestic. So what that means is you are from Canada being trafficked right here within Canada. That is what we tend to see. That's really what is the most common thing that is taking place. Oftentimes zero movement is taking place across any border in order for a person to be trafficked. And finally, sex work is not the same thing as sex trafficking. They are different. In sex work, a person can consent. In sex trafficking, you cannot consent. You cannot consent to being trafficked. That is not a choice. There is force, fraud, and coercion there. That person is being manipulated into being trafficked, and therefore it is non-consensual. And so you might be wondering, how exactly does this happen? How does a trafficker take a vulnerable young person and traffic them out? So things tend to start off in the luring stage. In the luring stage, traffickers are finding a vulnerable young person. They're finding a vulnerable young person. They're assessing to see what vulnerabilities they have. It could be that they've been previously assaulted. It could be that they, don't have, a supportive family environment where they feel like they could go to their family with anything. It can be that they're being bullied in school, whatever it might be. Traffickers are trying to find a vulnerable young person and befriend them and build this trusting relationship. And once they build that trusting relationship, they're going to ask questions that feel so deep, that make this person feel like, oh, I've been wishing for someone to just ask me that my whole entire life. I've just been wishing for someone to take the time out of their day to ask me about my day. Traffickers make this person feel so incredibly special. And the reason that they do is they're collecting information. They are trying to see which one of this young person's needs are not being met. So that way they could meet every single one of those needs in the grooming and gaming stage. In the grooming and gaming stage, they're meeting every single need, plus more. So if that person didn't have a safe place to stay, they're giving them a safe place to stay. If they don't, have access to 3 meals a day, they are giving that person access to whatever it might be. They might be putting them up in a condo, helping them move out, paying for their tuition, whatever it might be. The trafficker has really figured out, what is it that's going on? What are the gaps? What are the vulnerabilities? And they're filling every single gap in the grooming and gaming stage. In this stage, it is extremely difficult to see any red flags. The red flags really start popping up in the coercion manipulation stage. And in this stage is when we tend to see a lot of mixed messaging. So traffickers, all the love and attention that they were giving this person before, they begin to withdraw it. And then they ask people to do things that are going to push their boundaries, their morals, their limits, and their beliefs. And once they do that thing, they shower them with love and attention again. And they pull that attention back, ask them to do something else, shower them with love and attention again. So it becomes this, manipulative cycle where, the person who's being trafficked, the victim, they are so likely to do whatever it is that the trafficker is asking them to do. Another thing that's really taking place here is that sexual acts are being rewarded. There's an association that traffickers are trying to create between sex and a reward, sex and money. A lot of people that we've worked with who have been trafficked, say things like, well, if I was just charging for sex from the day that, I, began having sex, I would have made so much money. I don't know why I wasn't charging in the first place, because traffickers have created such a strong association. And the way that they do that is they'll do things like, every time after, say this is someone that the person is sexually active with, they'll do things like, have sex, and then afterwards take them out shopping or shower them with love and attention or gifts or whatever it is that they might want in that stage. And then they also isolate this person from every single one of their healthy support systems. They do not want people spotting the red flags. They do not want parents getting involved. They do not want teachers, social workers, therapists. They don't want people to be able to spot the red flags. And they might convince that young person that screw that, you do not need a therapist, you are a-okay, you are fine, you don't need that support. Or they might say your parents, oh my gosh, they like ask you to clean the house all the time, like they're so annoying, screw them, you don't need them, you could be friends with me, right? Or you can move in with me and you don't need to be living with your parents, or you can be friends with my friends if your friends are not, treating you well, whatever it might be. Oftentimes they take issues and really turn a mountain out of a molehill when it comes to trying to isolate that person. And that is very effective, because it doesn't feel like this person is telling me I can't see my mom and dad, but it's rather someone saying, well, you don't need your parents. You could, I can be that person for you in your life, right? More or less. And so that isolation is very sinister, and oftentimes it can be really difficult to spot. And, a lot of parents, caregivers, friends really struggle with this, because it is hard. It is hard to see someone that you care about, really being isolated from that person. It might feel like this person doesn't want to talk to you. We've seen traffickers deleting text messages out of people's phones that are coming in from loved ones. And so, always, always, always just reach out, tell the young person, I love you unconditionally. You can come home to me. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm not going to judge you. Those are the things that are effective for getting young people to come home. Because if the trafficker is saying, well, your parents are going to judge you, they're not going to love you, they're really getting into their head. If you just say like, yeah, I love you, I don't care, I love you regardless, come home, I'm going to support you, we're going to get through this together, whatever it might be, that's actually a really effective way to really make sure that, you know, that young person can see the difference. And they know what your intentions are and the love that you're willing to give unconditionally. And so now that the trafficker has this young person right where they want them, it moves into the exploitation stage. In this stage, you know, boundaries are really being broken down, and they will almost always ask the person, you know, to engage in some kind of sex work. The reason that they ask is they want that person to feel like they chose. They want that person to feel like they said yes. They want that person to feel like they consented, but you cannot consent to being trafficked. You know, it is inherently non-consensual because of the nature of the trafficking, and there being force, fraud, and coercion all being facilitated by a third party in these situations. Traffickers can be very straight up and say, this is how much money you owe me, give me my money back, or they can continue to play on ideas of love, friendship, relationship, whatever it might be. Once someone is being trafficked, it is so hard to leave. They could be threatened with literally anything. It doesn't have to be physical violence. It could be, you know, it could be fear of physical violence, or it could be the fear of, you know what, if you do this thing, they've manipulated that person in the coercion manipulation stage, maybe to send nude photos or make a video with them. Well, I'm going to send your parents that picture. I'm going to send your parents that video. What are they going to think of you then? Right. So just really trying to, you know, threaten that person in many different ways in order to say yes. And of course, like I said, when it's very, very difficult once something does take place, because then they have, you know, more things that they could potentially threaten that person with. And then it's also very difficult because traffickers are really meeting a lot of the needs that the young person has. And so if that person walks out of that door, they might not get a meal. They might not have a place to sleep. They might be so isolated from family, from friends. And so it's really important to recognize and let young people know that they can come to you regardless, right? So that's important. Um, and then the other thing as well that's happening here is there's a trauma bond being created. It's very psychological. And so when I say it's very psychological, you know, that can be a very difficult bond to break, and it can be very difficult for people to leave. A lot of people also go back, but it's important to show unconditional love, unconditional support regardless. Traffickers almost always also ask the person that they're trafficking to traffic another person. We still give them supports and resources because we recognize that this is a part of their trafficking, and they're essentially just, you know, trying to get really vulnerable people to, you know, feel like they can reclaim some semblance of power and control back into their lives. And that's how they're manipulating people into recruiting other people. So these stages of commercial exploitation is the reality of what human trafficking looks like here within a Toronto context. This is the majority of what we're seeing. Every single human trafficking story is different. However, we tend to see this similar pattern being followed from story to story. And so there's a lot of different vulnerability factors that might make someone more likely to be trafficked. What I really want to emphasize for parents is that it is so important to recognize what are our children's vulnerability factors. What makes them vulnerable? And if they are vulnerable, what are the supports that we are putting in place? You can always reach out to the Toronto District School Board and get supports and resources through the Mental Health and Wellness Network as well. We'll have some information on that towards the end of the presentation. If you do not recognize what makes your child vulnerable, if you do not get them the supports that they need, they will find those supports somewhere else. And oftentimes, people that are out there in the world do not have the same unconditional love and compassion for your child with no strings attached that you do. So it is much better to actually recognize what their vulnerabilities are, get them supports and resources for every single one of the vulnerabilities that they might be experiencing in particular individual factors, and reaching out to the school to recognize that those are some spaces that you can get some supports and resources. I'm not saying that it's always enough, but you can reach out to victim services as well. We are also here to support because traffickers are very, very savvy. And, you know, if we're not able to support our kids, traffickers, you know, the way that they are able to get inside their minds is because they do provide that support. And then there's also systemic factors that make someone vulnerable to being trafficked. When it comes to the systemic factors that make someone being vulnerable to being trafficked, it's nothing inherent within those factors that make somebody vulnerable, but it is rather the fact that those are individuals that have been marginalized by broader structures in society that isolates them And that isolation, that marginalization creates the space for traffickers to then come in and provide those supports and resources that they're not getting from anywhere else. And so that's what's really important to understand about systemic factors as well. And so people that, are more marginalized, have less power and privilege, are more likely to be trafficked. That is what studies have shown time and time again. And so it's very, very important to recognize this. And, you can always reach out to supports and resources if you're ever struggling with things like sexism, if you're struggling with your citizenship status, with colorism, or with, education and resources and supports, getting supports for young people that have different abilities, right? And so just recognizing that there are supports and resources for anybody that might be marginalized. And we really do work hard at Victim Services as well as the Toronto District School Board to make sure that if anybody's been marginalized by society, how can we help? How can we, support those individuals in a way that is meaningful, in a way that is powerful, and in a way that gives them power back? Some of you might be wondering, where can young people be targeted? I just want to emphasize that one of the really common places these days is online. In particular, after the pandemic, there is a very false sense of security and safety around young people being online. And just looking at strategies on keeping young people safe. Young people are going to be online. This is a reality of the year, of the time that we live in. It is so much better, rather than putting a full out ban on all electronics, all media, anything like that, talking to them about, who are strangers online. If there's people that you even have trusted relationships with, if somebody makes you feel uncomfortable online, what can you do? You can come to me. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to take away your electronics. I'm going to support you regardless, right? So recognizing that and just really making sure that we still provide some of those supports and resources. And I'll check in with the Toronto District School Board as well. We've definitely done some presentations on online safety and, parents helping keep young people safe. And if that's something that you would like to see, definitely feel free to email, and we'd be happy to set up something along those lines as well, because I recognize that it's a lot. It feels like there's always something and new things that we want to do in order to keep young people safe. There's also a lot of red flags that we can potentially look out for. One red flag individually doesn't necessarily mean that a person is being trafficked. However, a combination of these can definitely be, a red flag to reach out for support, reach out to the Toronto District School Board, and really just check in with them and say, this is what's going on. Can I please get some supports and resources? And we are more than happy to provide those as well. So I want to talk to you all about talking to kids about trafficking. I know that it is so challenging. One of the biggest struggles that a lot of parents have is, how do I talk to my kids about trafficking? And then on top of that, after I talk to my kids about trafficking, if someone is being trafficked or anything is going on in a young person's life, how do I support them effectively? It's really hard. It is really challenging. And so let's talk about, pardon me, some of the best practices for talking to kids about challenging topics like human trafficking. So first of all, define and explain human trafficking. At victims at the Toronto District School Board and at Victim Services, we actually have a lot of education that is going out to let young people know what is human trafficking, how can you protect yourself, what are the red flags. If you would like a presentation at your child's school and you are not sure who to reach out to, I will actually just send we will send a message in the chat as to who you can reach out to in order to schedule those presentations at the end of the presentation. So the email is TEAR, TEAR, for Teens Ending Abusive Relationships, TEAR@vstoronto.com. So that's TEAR@vstoronto.com. And we can go into young people's school. We do it all the time. And we talk to them about what is human trafficking, how to keep themselves safe. And we also talk about interrelating concepts, things like consent, things like healthy relationships, as well as media use and figuring out how to use media safely. So it's important to help young people understand what is human trafficking, and be able to describe it and pick up on the red flags, of something happening. So, help young people understand, what are the warning signs? How does it happen? How can I recognize a warning sign? And, really sharing some of those red flags with them, because a lot of people may not actually realize, um, that something might be trafficking that's going on with one of their friends. There's so many presentations that I've done over the years where afterwards, that young person actually goes out and says, oh my gosh, or comes up to me and says, oh my gosh, I think my friend is being trafficked. I think this thing is taking place. And then we're able to get them connected to the right supports and resources, right? So helping them understand what are the warning signs. Also teach them to trust their gut. If something is off, teach them to trust that feeling. It's so easy to ignore the signs. It's so important to help them, trust their instincts, right? Oftentimes, like I mentioned, we think about stranger danger. People are building trusting relationships with young people and manipulating their actions and behaviors. And so recognizing that, if something like this is taking place, it is not their fault. And oftentimes, if something does not feel right, it probably isn't. Help them watch out for their friends too, right? A lot of the times when people reach out for supports, it's not the person actually reaching out for support themselves. It is a friend being like, hey, something is going on with my friend, and that person needs help. That person needs support. It's also important to talk to young people about healthy relationships, helping them recognize what is a healthy relationship. What does that actually look like? Oftentimes, we know that people are getting recruited by someone that they know, whether that is an intimate partner, a friend, an acquaintance, a family member. So it's not enough to just say, oh, well, strangers are bad. We need to teach young people, what does abuse look like? What do healthy relationships look like? How do we talk about consent? How do we talk about safety? How can you set healthy boundaries? What does a healthy relationship look like? So respecting one another, being honest with one another, trusting each other, being equal and having open communication. And we're definitely going to be looking into future presentations on talking to young people around healthy relationships and talking to young people around consent as well. It's also important to help young people understand what is a safety plan. So basically, a safety plan is just a plan to protect themselves. So this could be helping them identify who's a safe adult in your life. Could be you as a parent or a caregiver. It could be an older sibling. It could be an older cousin. It could be a grandparent. It could be a friend's parent, right? Anything like that. A trusted adult is someone who is non-judgmental, who is supportive. Um, and, creating a safety plan includes things like figuring out online safety practices and how to keep things the most safe, figuring out code words, and things of that nature. And so really figuring out, how do we keep young people safe online and how can we work together with them to create that plan of safety? Also encourage them to reach out for help. There's a lot of people that don't know where to get help or are just too afraid to ask. Let them know that if anything were to happen to them, it is okay to ask for help. They can come to you at any point, even if they've broken a rule that you've set between, the two of you or within that household, and that you're not there to judge or shame them. You're there to help guide and support them in any way possible, and they can still come to you. And just recognizing as well that there's other trusted adults and community supports that are available to help. And of course, equip them with language that they can use when they're seeking help from others. So, um, just talking to them about, ways to express if something is feeling wrong or uncomfortable or unsafe, right? Like feeling like I'm being made to do things I don't feel comfortable with. I feel like I don't have control. I feel like I don't have a choice. My gut feeling is wrong. I don't feel respected, or I don't feel powerful. I feel powerless, right? Those are different ways of um having open and honest conversations. And in particular, when we model this behavior, it can really help young people identify when they're experiencing similar feelings and give them the language to express what exactly is going on with them as well. It's also really important to take a trauma informed approach. And what that means is just understanding that young people can have experienced some form of trauma and we might not know. Um, I like to use this iceberg analogy. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is what we see, but then there's the huge bottom of the iceberg of things that we just quite simply do not know. we are more likely to know if we are open and honest and leave the doors open. But, children go through phases, they go through different times in their lives. And, we may not know every single thing as it's happening at that time. And so recognizing that young people might be behaving in a particular way because of what they're going through. So whether or not you know exactly what's going on, just taking a trauma-informed approach just means recognizing that they could have been traumatized in any way, shape, or form. And so it might be that, maybe all of a sudden your child was super loud and outgoing and now they're no longer that way, or maybe they were very quiet and shy and now they're getting having outbursts or something like that, and just recognizing that something deeper could be going on, something below the tip of the iceberg that we're not seeing. um and the best way to actually be able to support young people, if that's what's going on, is leaving the doors open. I'll use the example of my own family and siblings. So whenever my younger sister is feeling really uncomfortable or something's gone on with her, she always gets really sad. But my younger brother, he's blowing up, he's so angry, and he's arguing over little things. And taking a trauma informed approach means recognizing what does trauma look like for different people, and then also recognizing how can I recognize, so how can I recognize the signs within a person, but then how do I support effectively without, re-traumatizing that person. And so, when we're using a trauma informed approach, we're ensuring that that person is, feeling safe, that they have choice involved, that we're collaborating with them, that they feel that they can trust us and we're empowering them. And these are the principles that victim services uses and how we use them in our practice in order to support individuals that have experienced trafficking or are experiencing trafficking as well. It's really designed to prevent re-traumatization, and that's a conscious or unconscious reminder of past trauma that results in a person re-experiencing the initial trauma. This can be triggered by things like a situation, an attitude, or an expression, or by certain environments that replicate the dynamics of that trauma taking place. So that could be like feeling like you're losing power, control, or safety. And so, I kind of like to think of ourselves in many ways. We are, we're at odds with traffickers, and we are trying to do the opposite of traffickers in order to help young people feel empowered and help them flourish. So when it comes to traffickers, they silence people's voices. Our job is to listen to people that are survivors. And, these tips and things that I'm sharing are not just specific to human trafficking in terms of taking that trauma-informed approach, in terms of supporting young people and things like that. But these are general to any challenging topic that you might be having a conversation with young people around. So our job is to listen. If we shut down the conversation and say, somebody's saying, well, this thing happened, and we don't let them finish their sentence, and we go, well, no, 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 no. We're replicating the power dynamics that were taking place within the trafficking situation, because they're going to feel like their voice is silenced again. Traffickers take away that person's power, or they abuse their power. So our job then becomes, giving choice to young people, making them feel like they have the ability to choose, making them feel like they have the ability to choose, for example, their own goals, their own hopes, and their dreams. And I know it's easy to kind of push our thoughts and ideas onto young people because we just want things to go the way that we want them to, because we think if they listen to us, well, that will be the thing that keeps them safe. That's what will be the things that makes them feel comfortable. And oftentimes it is. And just recognizing that, we can empower them to make good and positive choices as well. Traffickers also exploit someone's vulnerabilities. And so when it comes to exploiting that person's vulnerabilities, oftentimes they're making empty promises. And so it's our job as parents and caregivers to just be consistent, to follow through with promises that that person is making. Traffickers, they are going to isolate that person from their healthy support system. It is our job to build up their support system. It is our job to make sure that, they're able to see friends, that they feel comfortable, that they feel safe, that they feel supported, that they can meet with, people that make them feel good, whether that's in their family or within their school community or anything else like that. And, at Victim Services, we really aim to collaborate with other organizations. You can aim to collaborate with other people. As we all know, it takes a village to raise a child, and it's not easy. And so recognizing that we can collaborate with others. Traffickers also expose and strip a person's identity, and it's really our job to protect and rebuild that young person's identity in order to make them feel safe, in order to make them feel comfortable, in order to make them feel supported, cared for, and loved. And so, when supporting someone's disclosure, oftentimes there's so much shame and stigma involved, and that is what leads to communication that might not be positive. And just recognizing that there is nothing inherent in someone being trafficked that is shameful, or anything like that. Those young people, they deserve support, they deserve resources. So remember to stay calm, listen to them very carefully, listen to them very actively, let them guide the pace. Don't push and ask too many questions, avoid questions that put the blame on them. Things like, why would you do that? Why did you listen to them? Anything like that. Allow them to lead the conversation. Don't ask too many questions, especially if you're going to end up making a disclosure or reporting to someone. They will oftentimes have to repeat their story, and that is a very traumatizing thing to do. And so, of course, if they want to come forward and share their full story with you, of course that's understandable, but recognizing that if this is something that they are also going to have to share with someone else, what is going to be the least traumatizing for that person? Let them know what's going to happen next. Never promise them that we're going to keep this fully confidential unless you can deliver on that promise, and it will be the safest thing possible for them, for that to be the promise that you're making. In terms of being supportive, just let them know that they're not in trouble, that they're safe with you, that you're very glad that they've chosen to tell you about this, and they've done the right thing by telling you. Let them know that you're sorry that they've been hurt and that this has happened to them. It sucks when something happens that makes someone feel traumatized or hurt in any way, shape, or form. Just let them know that you're going to do everything that you can to make sure that this does not happen again, and that they're supported. And also let them know that other people who can be trusted to help support and solve this problem. And so recognizing that and letting them know that really does allow for a more of an openness to other people coming in and supporting them as well. And so let young people know that you love them no matter what. Tell them that they can come to you no matter what. You're not there to judge them. You're not there to shame them. You're not there to bully them. Ask them questions directly, reflect understanding and empathy in your words, be aware of any vulnerabilities that they might have. Stay calm, take a break if you're not feeling comfortable or if you're feeling upset. Be aware of the body language that you're using, and be sure to label feelings without labeling youth. It's very different to say you're an angry person versus saying, I understand that you're angry right now. And of course, reach out to us for help. We are all here to help, both at Victim Services and the Toronto District School Board. Don't expect young people to know that they're being trafficked. You might have learned new things here today that you'd never known before. So educate young people, let them know what the warning signs are, let them know how to see if something like this is taking place. Don't judge or shame youth. Judgment and shame and feeling like they can't come forward is really one of a really, really big risk factor for people continuing to stay in human trafficking situations and not feeling like they can leave. This is a huge factor, and it's important to let young people know it is not their fault. And they also don't need to feel ashamed for anything that has happened to them. They deserve support, resources, love, all of that stuff very unconditionally. Also, don't expect the young person to disclose right away. This takes time, and also recognize that there are people who are here to help, including us. And so with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Linda to the stage as well. And we are going to have a bit of a conversation around judgment and shame and stigma when it comes to human trafficking specifically, and how to overcome that and how to really effectively support young people. So welcome, Linda. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Jasmine. I mean, I appreciate it more than you know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So I just kind of want to start off by one, acknowledging that, as a group, we respect the survivor and their confidentiality and privacy around their story. We do have consent to share Samantha's story with all of you. And we also just want to express our gratitude to, for the opportunity to learn from a parent of a survivor. We know that this is not always easy work, but we are so grateful that, you show up every time just to raise education, raise awareness, and support others in the community. So kudos to you, Linda. And yeah, so I'll get things started by just asking you that as a parent of a survivor, can we kind of ask you to give us a brief description of your daughter's story? What did her trafficking look like? How did it happen? What took place?
I'm just going to reiterate what you said, because I never start talking about Samantha's story without letting the audience know that she's given me her personal permission to talk. So Samantha ended up being gang raped at a party one night. Due to that gang rape, she also became pregnant. Most of the friends at school that she had at the time, she had like two kinds of sets of friends, and one she was kind of drifting away from. And so the new set of friends she was kind of hanging around suddenly didn't believe her story, started ostracizing her, started calling her names, started bullying her, saying that she was just saying she was pregnant, that she was raped in order to excuse the pregnancy. So she had a ton of people who didn't believe her. Some people in the community didn't believe her, some of family, church family. And, she felt completely ostracized. That is what I think her biggest vulnerability was just simply feeling so lost and alone. Here she was, a victim, and everybody's just saying, no, that didn't happen. Along comes a guy. He's out in the smoking area outside the school one day. She sees him talking to some people that she knows. Then he reaches out to her on social media because she had seen him outside of the school talking to other people. She assumed he was safe. She started responding. He started saying how much he admired her. He thought she had so much courage, that she still wanted to keep the baby in spite of all of this, that he believed her story. He was going to be there. He was going to help. They started a relationship. Even though we were against it, Samantha at that point was 17, turning 18. And when the baby was born, he still stayed part of her life, promised to be a father figure, started doing whatever he could to get in between her and our family. We're very close family. Started telling her lies about us and us lies about her. And took us a while to figure some of that out, but we knew there was something wrong with this relationship. Neither my husband and I have been in an abusive relationship, nor seen too much of it. So to us, that's what we thought this might be. We had no idea of the real crime that was going on. But so we were trying to do what we could to constantly keep our doors of communication open with her, let her know. Eventually, he convinced her to move out, and she did. And shortly after she moved out with him, that's when he started trafficking her. It only lasted for about 4 months, thank goodness. At one point, she came home and he was standing over her son's crib and was threatening him. And so she got him drunk. She called me and she came home. And all the things you said in your presentation were all factors in Samantha and the trafficking journey that she was in, the exploitation, the brainwashing. And I was on an interview today and somebody said to me, how can they do this and not know that this is happening to them? Well, we didn't know it was happening to her. We didn't know what sex trafficking was. It's why I do what I do now, because I don't want any other parent to put their head on a pillow at night, not knowing. We might have been able to prevent this for Samantha. So that's the short story.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I know it's not always easy to share such a difficult story, especially when, it's a child of yours and someone who you love and care so much. What was it like for you finding out that your child was being trafficked?
It took Samantha 8 years to know that that's actually what happened. So for 8 years, she stayed silent. She lived in an exterior jail by keeping quiet because of the shame and feeling like somehow she was to blame. Somehow she thought she had said yes. And it wasn't until she could talk to a police officer that she discovered that actually what had happened is she had been trafficked. And that's when she come and told us. So it was 8 years after the fact, which in some ways was a blessing, because we knew she was very distant from it and she'd already conquered it. She'd already done so much self-healing. But it was also heartbreaking to know that she did all of that on her own, that she didn't feel like she could come and tell us anything, that she felt so ashamed and so ostracized from the world because she was sure that people would just look at her and think that she was a horrible person because of what she had allowed to happen to her. So it was extremely difficult to know that for 8 years, she was in that jail cell silently alone.
For sure. And I think you really touch on an important point where there's this perception of, I allowed this to happen. And when people are living within that space of, feeling judged and ashamed by other people around them, and not recognizing that this is not something that they consented to, this is not a choice that they made, that can be really, really challenging, to be able to do that self-healing and support yourself very effectively. And, you mentioned in Samantha's, story about vulnerability, and that vulnerability really presenting itself, as a teenager experiencing sexual assault, and then being pregnant. How do you think judgment and shame was something that made her vulnerable to being trafficked in the first place? And then how do you think it played out in terms of her not being able to seek adequate supports and resources later?
You know what? When you are raped, for some reason in our society, we start portraying, well, what did you do? Well, what did you say? Did well, you showed up at a party that, your parents didn't even know you were at. So you deserve this anyway. Well, that they're going to give you the drug if you're at a party, especially where you don't know hardly anybody. Why didn't you protect yourself? We start throwing those accusation darts constantly, assuming somehow they should have been able to stop this, when in actuality, they're a victim. And we re-victimize them every single time we throw one of those accusation darts. And it becomes something that they put their head down, their shoulders are slumped, and they don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to have to even try to explain this, even if they think somebody's possibly going to be a support system, because what if they're not? I have to go through this and get re-victimized all over again. And it's the judgment that people have. And I know that judgment firsthand because as a parent of somebody who's trafficked, I get the same thing all the time. Well, how did you not see this? Why didn't you know what was going on? Why weren't you there for her? Why did it take her so long to tell you? It's easy to assume that you have the answers when you've never lived it. And it's one of the things that I had learned years before even this happened. I thought for sure my kids were going to be this type of kid and I was going to raise them this way. And then life happens. One ends up with a disease. And then there's one that's gay, and we weren't prepared and ready for that in our generation. And one had a drug problem. And there's stuff. Life just throws you stuff. And you suddenly realize things aren't going to be the way you actually thought they were going to be. And that's when you have to make that choice that you need to survive this. And the best way to do that is to figure out how you can make all these things that happen in your life make you better, not better. And that's a hard thing to do when everybody's pointing a finger at you. And it's a choice you have to consciously make. You have to say, I'm going to do something about this so that it doesn't happen to other people, hopefully. But so that I can live with myself, so that I can put my head in the pillow at night and I can know that I tried to make a difference. Yes, I screwed up. Yes, I made a mistake, possibly. But most of my mistakes were made out of lack of education. Most of Samantha's mistakes were lack of education. Though she's a victim. I'm a secondary victim. And why do we feel as human beings we ever have a right to judge anybody else unless we've walked a mile in their shoe? And that's just one thing we just inherently do as human beings. We start judging and shaming. The second part of that question, Jazz, was what is going for support systems? Yeah. Okay. So again, I think it's the same thing. how do you know? Like, she didn't say anything to anybody, and she started working for victim services as volunteer so that she could become a police officer. And so she hadn't even said the story to like anybody. Nobody knew, because she had no idea really she was even trafficked. Took her 8 years to figure that out, and she was told that's what happened to her. So she just really thought somehow she'd made a horrible mistake, that somehow she'd said yes, and so she felt she had to live with this. She felt she had to live with the secret. And on all honesty, the thing that freed her was understanding what actually happened to her, and then getting her voice back, being able to say to people, this happened to me. This is how it happened to me. And she started working for victim services on a regular basis for 1.5 years, went into schools and started telling her story, became as transparent as she could to show people, yeah, I messed up. I messed up big time because I went to a party my parents didn't know. But that doesn't mean I deserve to be raped. That doesn't mean that I deserve to be trafficked. That doesn't mean that I deserve to be ostracized because I got raped. Nobody has the right to shame me for things that happened to me. The only thing I did wrong was go to a party. All of us go to and do things we shouldn't do, and the consequences that could happen to us are astronomical. That's why we're always saying to our kids, don't do that, because, and we know the potential dangers, and yet we drive fast. We know we could get into a car accident. So that's shame and blame because she went to a party, and forgetting that she was a victim when every other part of this, that's the part that we need to, as a society, get better at, and understand that we're just re-victimizing these people, and they're not going to come for support unless, as a society, we stop judging people in their lives and in their situations in their lives, and just start loving them no matter what.
I think that's so powerful. So many of the different things that you just mentioned, in terms of providing unconditional support and resources and love, in terms of not judging or shaming other people, for their life choices, about being educated and empowered, to support young people in whichever ways we can. And if we don't know what to do, using those as growth opportunities. And, we may not always know what to do when our child is going through one particular thing. We may not always have the answers, but recognizing that there's education out there, there's resources out there, there's supports out there, and we can reach out to those and get the help and support that we need. And I think one really powerful point in Samantha's story was that she called you, as she was being trafficked, and when she realized that something was wrong and her child was in danger, she called you. Why do you think she called you? What made her feel comfortable enough or safe enough? What in your relationship created the space for her to feel like, okay, something is wrong, I'm going to call my mom?
There's always been this underlying thing in our family, always has been, always will be, where my kids know that, yes, I have very strong opinions about what's right and wrong, but I don't expect you to have the same opinions I have. I hope that you've learned some things from me throughout your childhood and raising you as a parent, but I want you to be an independent thinker, and I want you to be able to have your own belief systems, your own moral codes. But I hope that along the way, I've trained you why I have what I have, and that you see some reason in some of it. But and we never said it per se, but we always had that thing where I want you to be an individual, and that means you're allowed to have a voice. And I think she knew that she could, well, she's come right out and told me that she could call me and literally look at me and say, Mom, don't ask any questions, at least not right now. And that I would honor that it was just more important that she called me and me know she was in need and be there to take care of that need. We are a very strong, loving family. We do all kinds of things together. Right now, I have all my kids under my roof right now because my daughter came home from BC, and Samantha ended up having a day off, and so she, whipped right over, and we're all here, and that's the kind of family we are. And I thanked her later because she went and picked up my daughter from the airport, and she goes, no, Mama, don't thank me. I love my siblings and I love being with the family. And that's why she called us back, is because, first of all, she knew that if she ever told me what was going on, My heart would be breaking for her. I may not understand it. I may even silently judge and ask, oh, what the heck happened? But that first and foremost, I'd wrap my arms around her and say, baby, what can I do? How can I help you? How do we get through this? How do we let this make us better, not better? What do we do? And both of us would probably be pools of tear on the floor hugging each other. But she's a very independent young woman, has been from the day that she was born. And so she didn't say a lot of things, and she didn't ask for help, and she didn't open up and tell us anything. But she knew that regardless of whether she said anything or not, she was going to be surrounded by love if she came back home and be able to get back on her feet again.
I think that's so powerful, just recognizing the power of, recognizing that we may not always actually agree with what's happening and what's going on, but just providing them with that unconditional love and support. And I see it with you all the time, with the presentations that you do and the love and the compassion that you bring, to just Samantha and the work that you do in all different ways, shapes, and forms. And it's just so beautiful and so powerful. I want to ask you, despite the shame and stigma, what inspires you to speak out on human trafficking? I know you mentioned that sometimes people judge your story. Sometimes people say, well, you're her mom, you didn't pick up on this quick enough, or you should have done this and you should have done that. And you mentioned that unless you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you have no idea what that person is going through. And you don't 100% know until you've been through it, or until you've had the education from someone like you on how to deal with this and how to support. So yes, as I mentioned, despite all the, pardon me, shame, stigma, all that type of stuff, what drives you to be doing presentations like this and making yourself so vulnerable?
My daughter, Samantha, ended up going into schools and telling girls about her story. And we have no idea how many lives she may have prevented from being trafficked just by her being transparent, telling her story. She, my example, she became the parent, and I was following her example, and she was the victim. So for her to retell her story every single day, day in and day out for a year and a half, it wore her down, and she had to give it up for her own mental health and for her own physical health and for the well-being of her family that she is now trying to raise. But she thoroughly encourages me to continue doing what I'm doing as far as educating the parents. And so knowing that I have her blessing, and knowing that I could potentially prevent another young woman from having to go through that by reaching out and training a parent, teaching a parent, showing a parent my mistakes, and being as transparent and vulnerable as possible and saying, this is where we screwed up. We didn't know about sex trafficking. We had no idea. We didn't know about all of her vulnerabilities. We didn't find out about how much her friends and people were ostracizing her. And we didn't know nor teach her proper consent. We knew 2 of the points. We didn't know all of them. And we didn't realize. Therefore, we didn't teach her. I don't want to put my head on the pillow ever again, any night for the rest of my life, without knowing that I haven't done my very best so that other parents can put their head on the pillow at night, knowing at least they're educated.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's just so powerful to recognize the strength in being able to be vulnerable and share such a challenging thing so that other parents can feel supported and know what to do. Do you have any tips for parents who want to talk to their kids about human trafficking and just don't know how?
Honestly, you know what, because kids are also different, and they're all going to ask such different questions. I have 4 kids, and they're also uniquely different. As far as tips on how to I mean, I do a whole presentation on this part alone, just talking to kids about their vulnerabilities and about talking about teaching age appropriate consent. There's lots of different little tips in there. The biggest thing that you can give your kids is yourself, is your time. And it's our biggest commodity right now. Our lives are so busy. We have to work in order to put a roof over our heads. We're taking kids to different sports, this, that, and the other thing. We don't have a lot of time. But I think the biggest thing that we need to do is just make sure we take the time to sit and talk. And they might not always want to talk when you're ready to talk. So just start talking about everyday things. How was your day? How was this? How's this going? You know, you had a test. And when they know that you're making that space in your life for them to come and talk to you, eventually when they want to talk to you about something that's really important, they're going to know you're going to take the time, that they're important enough that you will take that time for them. As far as if you want to be the one to start bringing up those topics, it's a difficult thing to say for sure. But one of the things I think you really need to do is to start figuring out what their vulnerabilities are, and then address it from that point of view, more so than attacking in on sex trafficking, especially depending on the age, depending on the person. It's stuff you have to talk about, but don't go barging in like a bull right now. Like, ease into this a little bit and start talking about online safety, and start talking about what do they think sex is, and what, you know, and start talking about what a healthy relationship looks like. And so we're talking about a long-term conversation over many, many months in order for this not to be mind-blowing, or your kids to go, oh, gross, like I don't want to talk to you about this. You have to build that relationship with them first. So you need to be spending that time with them. As far as tips on what to say, go with the flow. I mean, just start asking questions. And like you said, not accusatory questions like, you know, why did you do that? But say, how was your day? So what's going on? So do you have anybody you're interested in right now? So let's talk about online safety. Teach me something. Show me how, you know, what you do, and start making it so that it's a two-way kind of street, you know, because they know more than you. I can guarantee you, they know how to work around every rule you have in the house. So use that to your advantage and start asking them. So how do you figure the best way is to do online safety? Like, come on, you need to educate me. You're the tech savvy person. I'm not. I'm old. I'm a dinosaur. I need your help. So there's 100 different ways you can start approaching this. It depends on your personality. It depends on your kid's personality. It depends on their age. But the number one thing you can do is make sure they know you will take the time to talk to them, even if it's just about how's your day.
And I think the point that you raised about all children being different, all parents being different is very, very important, and recognizing that all those conversations may not sound the same. However, and they are going to sound different from person to person. But the most important thing is building the trust and rapport to create a safe environment in which that young person feels like, if something is going on, this is someone that I could go to, and this is someone who is not going to judge me. Being that safe adult, being that loving, caring person. And so definitely, I think that's great advice. We see it work all the time. And I think that's very, very valuable. So for my last question for you today, Linda, I just want to ask you, where are things at now with you and Samantha? I know you mentioned that everybody's home. It's inching closer to the holiday season, and just wanted to ask you how things are with Samantha, how things are with you and your family.
We are very blessed. We ended up with a happy ending. Samantha had a couple years of not having a good life, but she's taken that and she's allowed it to make her a better person. And she's shown us how to do that. We don't talk about this when we're all together as a family. We don't ask her questions. We don't expect her to relive it in any way, shape, or form in this house. I'm writing a book, and it's about my story. It's my memoir. It's my story as a parent raising somebody who's trafficked. So I have had to ask her a few questions to kind of jar my memory about a few things. But I always start off by saying, answer this when you've got time. Answer this when you feel comfortable. I'm in no hurry. But she knows I'm writing the book, and she's okay with it. But I know some days she just might not be okay to answer that question that day. She has learned how to do so much self-healing. She knows all the triggers that will start up in her. And so she knows how to ward those off. And she's taught a lot of those to me. We spend a lot of time together. She comes over for breakfast once every couple of weeks, if not more. She's over for coffee. We're texting each other all the time, and every possible chance we get, as many of us that can get together are together. We call ourselves the Harless Clan. Even on my YouTube channel, we have a whole section of just the fun and crazy, stupid things we do as a family. We had Harless Games this summer, and so some of the videos are on my YouTube channel there, because that's important to keep a relationship, a family healthy, is by spending some fun, crazy time together, but also spending some serious talking times together, as well as, teaching them to cook. Samantha still calls me for recipes. How did you cook this, Mom? She still comes over for hot tubs after she's been working out. Like she's the one that's gets most of the credit for this because of all the self-healing that she has done. And she got a lot of that education through victim services while she was working there. But she's taught us how to, what the world's going to do, what the world is going to do. The world may judge you. You do what you need to do so that when you're put your feet on the floor in the morning, you've done your best to be the best person you could be and move forward. And she's a shining light of that every single day. And she's my inspiration, and she shines it on to all of us. And today, my husband, all of my kids were together, and my husband said, okay, so I just want you all to know, on the trip back from BC after we dropped Sabrina off, I'm sitting there, and because of, the dispute that Sabrina and I had like a couple days before, and Sabrina handling it so right, he says, I'm on my way home, and he says, and I realize all of my kids are better people than I am. And he says, and I'm just so proud of all of you guys for just being better. And I can tell you, every one of my kids got up and went and gave him a big hug. And they said, well, it's because of your example and you taught us. And he said, no, your mom taught you most of it. And I said, no, you living your life and being there and hugging your kids and just, yeah, we made some mistakes and we weren't the best parents, but you know what, that unconditional love you were talking about, and literally just, and honoring our kids and telling them how awesome they are. Like, that's where we are right now. We have a happy ending. I'm very grateful for it. I thank God every day that it turned out like this, because it could have been much, much worse.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and sharing the update as well on where your beautiful family is at. I know it's, an absolute, just a wonderful thing to be able to overcome something so challenging in such a wonderful and powerful way that impacts other people as well. So I just want to say thank you so much. We are so grateful to be able to have the opportunity to learn from you. So thank you, Linda.
I always appreciate the opportunity, Jasmine. I can never say your name right, but thank you.
Not a problem.
I also just wanted to say, Jasminder, thank you. Thank you so much, Linda, for again, being so vulnerable in your presentation and talking about something that is not easy for anybody, much less a parent. And I just wanted to just highlight one of our guests who was here tonight had sent a comment, just again, thanking you with such gratitude for your vulnerability and for your sharing. And that was Christina. So I just wanted to highlight that as you just carry on there near the end, Jasminder. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think it's definitely, as a community, we all feel a great gratitude to be able to hear from you, Linda, and just to hear that vulnerable story. It's not an easy thing to do, as we mentioned, and really sharing and being very, very open and honest and vulnerable. And I think that really removes a lot of the shame and the stigma that is attached to this, that shouldn't be there in the first place. And just recognizing, what can we do to, really undermine when people say, it's this person's fault, or, every time somebody's perpetuating those rape myths, really undermining them and saying, what, this person's a victim, they deserve love, they deserve support, they deserve that unconditionally, and we are here for them. And I think this is a really important step in that process. And I really encourage everyone to get involved. And prevent human trafficking in your community in many different ways. Feel free to spread the word, have conversations with other people about what you've learned today. It's also a very positive way to process a lot of the information that you learned today, because I do recommend that I do recognize, pardon me, that, an hour and a half is a long time. to talk about a challenging topic, you're more than welcome to volunteer with us. Help us by planning a fundraiser or an event within your community. You can always apply to volunteer with us in other capacities, like being on our board of directors as well. I also want to share with you all our 24/7 crisis line that is open to the public. If you are ever in crisis and you don't want to call the police, or maybe you do want to call the police and you're just not sure if you want to call the police yet, or you say, you know what, maybe I'll talk to someone at Victim Services, figure out what are my options. If I report, like what's going to happen? What are the next steps? You can call us. We're here to help you. We are here to support. We provide support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are unique in that. And no other place across Toronto, that is able to provide that support in person in that same way that is not emergency services. And so we are very excited and grateful and happy to be able to provide these services. I'm just going to leave during the ending portion of this presentation some contact information up on the board. We do have the Toronto District School Board Mental Health and Resources website as well, which is mentioned in the chat box. Toronto Police's Human Trafficking Hotline, Crime Stoppers, Kids Help Phone, 2S LGBTQ+ phone helpline, online safety tips for young people, as well as assistance with removing non-consensual images online, in particular sexual images. And so I'm going to leave that resource up on the screen while we answer some questions. Please feel free to take a screenshot. That is absolutely not a problem, and we will open it up for questions. I see that we